Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum students. So class 7 today we are going to complete the rest of our unit number 4 living organisms and their environment. Now moving on to the recycling processes. We are done with producers, consumers, habitat, ecosystem, ecological cycles, food webs, food chains. So all these things exist in an ecosystem. Ecosystem also have carbon cycle, water cycle, nitrogen cycle. So these nutrients keep on revolving. This is how recycling of nutrients takes place, and all this happens in the presence of sunlight. Now moving on to the carbon cycle. In carbon cycle, all living things are made up of carbon. All living things. Carbon containing molecules basically. For example, proteins, carbohydrates, fats, nucleic acids, all these compounds contain carbon in it. So the carbon compounds are used as a source of energy in all living organisms. So how does it take place is basically it is simple. It is not that complicated as it appears to be. For an example, certain processes in the environment. The cow or the buffalo in the center breathes, so it respires, in which carbon dioxide is released. The plants respire during night times, carbon dioxide is released. The dead organisms and waste products that decompose in the soil by fungi and bacteria, so they also release carbon containing compounds in the air. You can see there's a small factory here on the right side, and in normal factories the process of combustion takes place. Combustion is basically burning of material, burning of plastic, burning of bricks in bricklin, and many more. So the burning process, the combustion process, also releases carbon containing compounds in the air, carbonic compounds. So all this is a form of carbon going into the environment. Here you can see from the arrows in the right side from bottom to the top. So what happens? The carbon dioxide in the environment, in the presence of sunlight, is transferred to the plants. How? During the process of photosynthesis, where the plants use carbon dioxide as a product, and in the presence of sunlight and water, it transforms it into glucose or starch as a source of food in plants. And from there, this process, the carbon is transferred from the plants back into the soil, and this is how the dead organisms eat it. How that dead organisms or millipedes, centipedes, ants eat the dead material or are available on the base of the roots of a plant, whereas there are certain plants that are eaten by human beings, so that carbon is converted from the plant source inside the human beings and human system. Similarly, there are certain animals that eat those grasses and the carbon is transferred to those organisms. So there are certain carnivores that depend on other organisms for their food and eat that herbivore that depends totally on plants. So this is how carbon is transferred in the form of a cycle. It is simple, not complicated at all. So why it is important? It is involved in the decomposition of different processes in the disposal system of earth. And you know how the earth's climate is changing. Excess of carbon in the environment, that is resulting in the global warming concept. The carbon dioxide in the environment basically traps heat, and so the greenhouse effect in which the temperature is raised, that is becoming a major issue these days because the earth's surface is getting heated day by day. And that is why it is important that carbon keeps on recycling. And the burning and combustion processes are also responsible for dramatic increase in the heat effect of the earth. So we should not burn these fossil fuels, and we should plant more trees so that lots of photosynthesis can take place and the carbon is converted back into the earth. I hope you had a better picture of it today. Now moving on to the water cycle. Water cycle is quite simple. We also call it the hydrogen cycle. So this is the cycling of water in the environment. It's so simple how it takes place. The water from seas, rivers, lakes and trees evaporates in the presence of sun in the form of water vapors, and those water vapors collect and condense and develop a cloud, goes into the cloud, and it starts raining. That raining is known as precipitation. Scientific term used for rain is precipitation. So some of those water vapors, when the lighter ones move at a certain height and are dispersed or transferred towards the northern areas of the world where are the mountain ranges, and there those water vapors are condensed and develops snow tops on the mountains. And when there is high heat or in summers, that snow melts and water comes back to the rivers, and it irrigates the land areas and goes into the rivers as a runoff. So this is how the hydrogen cycle or the water cycle runs. Water cycle is known as hydrogen cycle because water is made up of H2O. H2 is also known as, H is the symbol of hydrogen. So it is very important. This is how water is reused again and again. It is cleansed and then it is reused by different organisms, human beings. And the basic steps are evaporation, condensation, precipitation. These are the basic 3 steps of a water cycle, and or the hydrological cycle. And this is how the water is balanced among different areas of the world through cloud formation, precipitation, and etc. Now moving on to the nitrogen cycle. You may find it a bit complicated, but it is not. And it involves few steps. It is a bit in more detail as compared to carbon and water cycle, but still, if you understand its concept, you will not find it difficult at all. So there are a few steps in a nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen fixation, how the nitrogen is fixed first, then the nitrogen assimilation, then ammonification, then nitrification, then denitrification. Here you can see denitrification. So basically what happens is, first of all, the nitrogen fixation. In this stage, what happens, the nitrogen in the environment is converted into nitrates and nitrites. That is the more available form of nitrogen. And how is it done? It is done by different atmospheric and industrial and biological processes, and how this is fixed. And it can also be fixed naturally by some nitrogen fixing bacteria. You can see nitrogen fixing bacteria in the soil and in the roots and their root nodules and roots of plants are those areas where fungi and bacteria are present, and they decompose the material, and nitrogen is converted into the more available form, and that nitrogen, when it is fixed, is further used by the plants. So second step, nitrogen assimilation. It is the form of nitrogen or the nitrogenous compounds in the processes of human body, for example, in the form of animal proteins. This is how animals convert nitrogen in the form of animal proteins, and plants convert this nitrogen in the form of plant proteins. And for carnivores eat those herbivores plants and plant protein part of nitrogen, and nitrogen becomes the part of the carnivore's body as well. So this is how nitrogen is assimilated, converted into proteins from animals and from plants. Then ammonification. Ammonification is a process in which nitrogen from dead bodies of living organisms, is converted into ammonia and ammonium. It is a form of nitrogen, ammonium ion, H positive, and ammonia. So this process is basically done by the decomposers, the bacteria and the fungi. So here the next step is nitrification. This nitrifying bacteria and fungi that are available in soil convert this ammonia into nitrates, and then finally into nitrites. Here you can see in the bottom nitrates, then to nitrites. These are the steps that are automatically done by bacteria and fungi in the soil, and then in the end the denitrification process takes place. This is how the nitrogen from the soil is transferred, and from the soil it is taken up by plants and animals, and then it is converted into plant proteins and animal proteins. Animal transfer it to other animals if they are eaten by carnivores, and plant proteins is converted or transferred to other organisms, for an example herbivores or omnivores. So this is how nitrogen is traveled among living organisms, and there are certain content of nitrogen in present in the atmosphere as well, and there are some denitrifying bacteria in the soil that breaks down the nitrates and release oxygen, and nitrogen then back is sent back into the air by this denitrifying bacteria, and by the action and activities of this bacteria, the soil can also face the shortage or missing up of the nitrogen content in the structure. That is why nitrates and urea is given to the soil as a source of fertilizer when lots of crops are grown. It is not that difficult, but go over it again and again over these 5 steps of nitrogen fixation, assimilation, ammonification, nitrification, denitrification. All the processes takes place in the soil naturally by bacteria and fungi. So this is how it travels. This is a more simpler diagram of the nitrogen cycle, in which bacteria does all the work in the bottom. The nitrogen separating bacteria and the nitrogen denitrifying bacteria on the right side, and that bacteria transfers nitrogen into the air, and nitrogen cycling takes place and then the nitrogen on the left side, nitrogen fixing bacteria, nitrates in the salt, transfers that nitrates from the nitrate salts from the soil back in by the process of nitrogen assimilation and ammonification. And in the center, human beings eat fruits from plants having plant protein in the form of nitrates eaten by human beings, and this is how nitrogen is transferred in human beings, and then human beings release nitrogen through feces, and that is again transferred to the soil. So it is basically circle step in which nitrogen is traveled among the ecosystem. It is very deep process, and it has further detail. You can see that from soil to plants, plants to animals, animals to animal waste going back into the soil. This is how the simple nitrogen cycle works. So class, I will continue this lecture in my next video, this, and we will discuss energy pyramid in that.